Jesus!
Hey, what are you watching?
Just some funny videos.
And by the way, what's the bandage for?
Tennis elbow?
Well, I hope it's not catching.
I'll tell you what might be catching. We've got some work to do today on a Mark III Ford Mondeo. Right, I've got a right treat today. We've got a Mark III Ford Mondeo. I realise this is going back in time, but one of our hire cars come under a little bit of an accident. You see, the driver ground out the sump, probably on one of them humps in the road. It lost all its oil. He then seized the bloody engine up. So now I've got this Mark III, it's a 2 litre petrol, one of them Duratec HE engines. So I can play around with it. But I wanted to point out a couple of little things, because there's a few jobs that are quite common to do on these cars, and they're like nuances, annoying little jobs to do. So I'm going to show you. One of them is that stupid dumbass breather hose behind the inlet manifold, and the other one is the power steering pump. The reason I'm bringing the power steering pump up, there's an 18mm nut with a pipe that comes out the bottom of the pump. You can't get a bloody spanner on it. So I'm going to show you probably the best way of removing that pump. Right, first off, if I was to remove the inlet manifold from this engine, then I probably would be able to get a spanner on the pipe underneath this power steering pump. But that's quite a lot of work to take this manifold off just to get that pump off. So I'm going to take this pump off first and show you the best way I've found of dealing with it. There's a pipe on the bottom of the reservoir. You might want to get a container underneath this, or a funnel and a pipe or something to catch all the fluid that comes out of here first. At the base of this reservoir, there's two 8mm like little bolts, one either side. So remove both of them. At the back of the reservoir, when you pull the wiring loom up, it comes off a stud, another little 8mm. So take that out. You can then wriggle that reservoir, and believe me, it will come off pretty damn easy. And the only thing that's going to be left holding it on is just that little connection in there. And there'll be a little O-ring in there, so just be careful you don't lose it. Notice the routing of the serpentine belt. The actual tensioner is the one below the alternator, and it's a 15mm bolt head. If you put a spanner and turn it clockwise, it will loosen the belt. So keeping that tensioner turned round, we can now take this belt off. You've only got to really take it off the power steering pump if you're just changing the pump. You can leave it on the rest of the pulleys, but I'm taking it off all of them. I understand when you're trying to do this in the car, it's a lot more difficult. You're limited for room. But on these Mark IIIs, if you take the driver's headlamp out, which I believe is just 2 clips and the front grille, the headlight comes out really easily. Then you've got a lot more access to actually get into this part here. You see, this pipe is the problem, this nut, this 18mm nut. Even if you get a spanner on it, you're so limited for room here, you've got no room to actually undo it. And the spanner butts up against the pulley. You can't get the spanner around here enough when you're in the car to actually undo this. Anyway, the bracket that comes off this pipe, there'll be a 10mm nut that holds the bracket onto a stud. So we'll get that 10mm out of the way. You can then pull that bracket off the stud and just twist it out of the way. Now this is the tricky bit, or the nuance bit. There's 4 10mm bolts holding this pump onto the engine, okay? But one of these bolts is behind this pipe. You can, at this stage now, you can get a 10mm ring spanner in there and undo that one. And when it gets close to the pipe, you can use an open-ended spanner, 10mm spanner, to remove it the rest of the way. And obviously once that bolt is completely undone, it will just butt up against the pipe, so you can leave it there. The remaining 3 10mm bolts the one with the stud. You can remove that, and the two at the top. Basically it, your pump's all undone. Woohoo! Now here's the thing. Now this pump is disconnected from the engine, you could, if you wanted to, you could turn it round. You'd probably have to get somebody with a large pair of Stiltsons and hold this pump, and then get your spanner on it and undo it, okay? But I'm telling you, that nut is pretty damn tight, so it'd be a struggle trying to undo it while holding the pump at the same time here. So I'm going to take this completely off. There's a bracket at the rear of the rocker cover, 10mm nut, and then you can remove that bracket holding your pipe, which obviously holds your pipe to the rocker cover. You see just up there on your steering rack, if you remove that Torx 40 bolt, you can then literally pull this pipe straight out of the rack. Just be wary of the O-ring and that you don't damage it. You can now lift your power steering pump and the whole pipe assembly right off the car. Just out of sheer interest, I'm going to see if I can undo this nut now. I'm just going to try and tap the spanner. Yep, that's undone. Woohoo! In actual fact, that was quite easy. I'm surprised, because sometimes these can be really tight. And I'll wind this out. There is Loctite, well, thread lock on the threads of this, so it probably is not going to be finger tight coming out. You're going to have to use the spanner. There we go, we're off. Excellent. Yeah. Now we can remove our pipe altogether. If we were replacing this power steering pump, just remember one thing. When you remove this bolt, put it back in the new pump, okay, before you put this pipe back on. And there are no valves or ball bearings or anything that's going to drop out of that hole, so don't worry. Now, if you didn't know, on these 2-litre Duratec, yeah, it is Duratec, 2-litre Duratec HE engines, there's a little breather pipe between the engine and the inlet manifold. The problem is, these hoses, these little breather hoses, they get oil in them. The rubber gets soft and they split. And then the suction from the inlet manifold sucks air into the hose, into the engine obviously, and it makes the revs stick up. Generally speaking, if you were to rev the engine, the revs will stay high for maybe 10 seconds before they die back down again. That's not very clever if it's an automatic car you've got. You could find yourself putting your foot on the brake a bit more than you need to, or taking off a bit faster than you expected. So if one of these hoses actually do split on your car, you really do need to replace it. You can hear it anyway, you can hear the air being sucked into the hose. The problem is, for what is basically a simple little breather hose you would expect to be able to change in a few minutes, is actually a bit of a nightmare of a job to do. Some people will be able to do this with the minimum amount of dismantling, okay? But I'm not going to show you that, because there's going to be a lot of people out there who if you have to try and replace that hose, you're going to get in a lot of difficulties. So I'm going to remove the inlet manifold. By the way, you haven't got to remove the inlet manifold. The best way I found of doing it myself is to actually unbolt the manifold, pull it forward towards the radiator, and that's all you have to do. Then you get enough access to get in there, remove the hose and fit the new one. It's still a little bit tight, but I'm going to take the manifold right off so you can see properly what's going on behind there. And then you can make your own mind up how you want to change it if you ever get to do this job. Let me just point out first of all, because I've just removed the power steering pump and reservoir assembly, okay, you don't have to remove that to change that hose. So if the power steering pump was still here, you can leave it there, okay? But I will say one thing, the driver's headlight, it's a lot easier if you take the driver's headlight out, because it gives you more room to get in here. And as you can see here, there's a 10mm bolt there holding the manifold on, which is right next to the actual power steering pump, and you can't really see that with a pump in the way. You have to go by feel with a lot of these bolts. The first thing I would do is there's the main wiring loom which sits up here on top of the manifold, the loom that runs around here to your throttle housing, your coil pack, and all the connections around here, water temperature sensor. I would disconnect all these multi-plugs off your EGR valve, get all them multi-plugs disconnected so you've got this whole loom in your hand, and move it out towards the radiator. Camshaft sensor connection and all 4 wiring plugs that go on your fuel injectors, disconnect all of them. The loom will be clipped into the manifold in various places. You'll just have to use a trim tool to disconnect the clips. And because we've removed the headlight, you can get your hand in there a lot easier and you can see better. There's like a plug connector down here. I think it's for your knock sensor. But you can pull that plug connector apart. It's a bit tricky to get to. Your air conditioning compressor connection, get that out of the way. Just remember things like your thermostat hoses, they're going to be in the bloody way. They're all going to be hindering you actually getting in here. Now this throttle housing, there's like 3 8mm bolts here which hold a bracket on, which need to come off. Your throttle cable can actually stay on it. You've just got to imagine the throttle cable is still connected. You can leave that on, okay? The 4 8mm bolts that hold the actual housing on, you can take them out and you can remove this whole housing with the cables on it and lift it over towards the back of the engine, out of the way. The reason I say take that throttle housing out of the way is because when this actual manifold is pushed backwards, with that out of the way, it gives you just enough room to get your hand in there and get the hose off. Otherwise it's in the way. There's a little vacuum hose connection here, which you'd have to pull off and take out of the way. And any more wiring connectors on any electrical components down the bottom of this manifold, just pull them off and move them to one side as well. But with all your wiring disconnected, you can now pull this wiring loom and just pull the whole lot towards the radiator so it's clear of the manifold. This loom's pretty much off anyway, but all the wiring down by your starter motor, you can leave that all connected. There's an 8mm headed bolt halfway down the back of this manifold holding your dipstick tube on. So you want to undo that and get that bolt right out of the way. You can bend the actual dipstick tube out of the way if you wanted to, but it's just as easy just to give it a little tug and it should come out of the engine anyway, and just take it out. Right at the very bottom of the manifold there's a 10mm bolt. You need to take that out. I'm at the point now where we're going to start taking the bolts out of this manifold. We're just going to point out, between the manifold and the actual radiator here, there isn't really much room. It's a bit on the tight side. Hey, they can't all be winners, can they? So yeah, as you can see on this car, you really don't have a lot of room here to work in. So when this manifold comes forward, you're very limited for space down there to actually get down there and change that hose. But you can do it. So anyway, whatever. Right, we'll start whacking these bolts out. The first one is right at the front of the manifold, at the top of where the throttle housing would go. Now you've got another one you've got to get between the manifold. It would help if you had like a magnetic 10mm socket, because otherwise you might drop the bolts. You may have to use like long nose pliers to get in there and retrieve them. This one here is actually the last bolt which runs along the top edge of the manifold. Remember that 10mm at the bottom of the manifold right next to the power steering reservoir? It's a lot easier to remove with the reservoir out the way, or the actual power steering pump out the way, but you can get the socket through here with the pump all in place. And there's another one just at the bottom there. You see, when you're trying to get these bolts out, when this is actually whole engine is in the car, it's a little bit difficult. You can't really see what you're doing. See, there's another tricky one. That's a hidden one in there. Yeah, I'll get that one undone. So you don't want to come out. You have to get some pliers in there to pull them out. There. And last but least, right in the centre of the manifold. That's it. So I'll get my pliers in there and pull that one out. This whole manifold should now literally just pull off. It's a little bit stuck down with the gasket, but it's it's cracked free. So now that will pull forward. I've got a bit of a chain here. Get it out of the way. Yeah, that's it. And there's your breather pipe, buried behind them. It is literally buried behind that manifold. And there's a coolant hose in the way as well. So I can move that out the way. Then you get some pliers, push the spring clip in. Preferably move the clip out the way. Then you need to try and hook this hose off, and it's not always easy. Yeah, it's not coming off that easy. It's pretty well stuck on there. So I'm going to stick a screwdriver in there, put a bit of freeing oil in there, just to try and free the rubber a little bit. Let's see if that's going to pull off now. Yep, we're off. That's it, done. Now at the bottom of the manifold, there's another clip holding the other end of this pipe on. You can get your pliers in there now and literally pull it off. So get that clip off the actual pipe itself. Once again, depending how long this pipe's been on there, it could be tricky getting it off. But yeah, you can remove it quite easily now when it's in the car. So I'll pull that right off. This hose here is actually okay, but normally they'll get a split. They'll get a split in them and they'll suck air in. And they cause all manner of bloody running problems. So that's what your engine is going to look like with your inlet manifold out of the way. Obviously there's your connection where your breather hose goes on. That's your engine breather assembly here, which is a load of 8mm bolts holding the whole lot onto the engine. Generally speaking, you haven't got to touch this piece in here. It's mainly just the hose that goes, that's the problem. And you've got a water hose here. I just thought I'd show this manifold here, because these are your SwirlFlaps. These actual flaps here, there's like a bar runs all the way along here, and these flaps, they open and close. They work by a vacuum unit on the end of the manifold. The trouble is, they get worn. Where the bar goes through, they actually get worn and they rattle about. And in the worst case, they can actually break up and be induced into the engine and destroy your engine. Right, let's have a little look. Yeah, see how that's wobbling around? That is just greasy and dirty in there, but yeah, you see how bad that one is, and that's actually not a bad one at all. I've seen these where they're literally really flapping around. When they get to that stage, you can physically hear them rattling in the car when the engine's like ticking over. Flipping it, I'll tell you something, I've never actually had one where this bit has broke off and gone into the engine, but I have heard some horror stories. I reckon we should do something about these flaps. So I'm going to first of all remove the 3 Torx 25 headed screws and remove this vacuum unit and see if I can get these flaps out, because we don't actually need the flaps in this manifold. We can take them out and fling them in the bin and just put the manifold back on an engine. It will still run fine. Oh my god, the actual rod is coming out. That's it, we're off. Well okay, I thought the rod was coming out, but it obviously wasn't. It was never going to be that easy, was it? But using some long nose pliers on the actual bar that runs all the way through the manifold, if I pull on that, yeah, there we go, that's moved out. Let's see if we can get it out some more. Come on, you can do it. Just got to prise it out. In actual fact, I'll clamp some mole grips on it because it's a little bit on the tight side. See if I can pull it. Yeah, it's gone. Yeah, look at that. Woo-hoo-hoo. The question is any of these flaps going to come out yet? Oh, I'll tell you something, it feels a bit loose. Whoop, that's coming out. Oh my God. Gee. Right, and there's also a little plastic housing. That can come out as well. Yeah. You see that? When that flap comes out, because these spring apart so you can take the flaps out. But that's completely all broken around here. That should be like a sleeve that sits around here, but it's all gone. So it shows actually how bad that one actually is. But this bit here, that'll go back in the manifold, just minus the flap. So I'll pop that back in. Ding! And obviously once the manifold's bolted up to the cylinder head, that can't come out, that'll be solid in there, it can't move. Anyway, let's get this completely out. Come on. Yeah! There you go. Woohoo! Okay, I'll just prise the rest of these sleeves out so we can remove the rest of these flaps. And then we've got one good manifold. This one isn't too bad. This one's still all in one piece. But anyway, I'll pull that apart, get the flap out. We don't need that. We'll just put this bit back in. There. Okay, I'll put our vacuum unit back on. By the way, there is an O-ring in there. So make sure it doesn't come out of place, because if it does, you're going to get an air leak. And then you will have running problems. So check the O-ring is in there securely, and you can push this back into place and we'll bolt it back up. There. Now we've got no flaps left in here to rattle around and possibly destroy the engine. You could literally bolt this manifold back onto an engine, start it up and drive off, and you wouldn't notice the difference. It will run perfectly fine. Anyway, that's it. I'm going to finish the video now. I've had enough today. I hope you're all keeping yourself occupied if you're locked in your houses. It must get boring standing at Tesco's or the supermarket waiting in line to go in. The one shop I've actually found where there's no queue and they've got no measures in place is Iceland. You can walk in, get your shopping and then go home. Anyway, I'll see you in the next video, guys. Adios.